All right, so my name is Claire, and I'll be presenting tonight with Michelle. We are both AmeriCorps members, and we are currently hosted at the Southern Region offices of the Nevada Department of Wildlife. So tonight we will be wrapping up Urban Wildlife Week, and we'll be talking about the Leave No Trace principles. And these are principles that you can use at any point in your life, but we'll be talking about how you can apply them in urban settings and how those relate to urban wildlife.
All right, thank you, Claire. So I want to start off by showing you guys this picture and letting you know that animals aren't inherently destructive towards human civilization. This picture doesn't happen. Most of them are afraid of humans, but it's not until they start getting in contact with us more often when they become desensitized to seeing us, making it more dangerous for both us and the animals. So if you guys could pull up your chat box again and let us know how these images make you feel. How they make you feel, any thoughts that come to mind, anything that pops up in your brain when you look at these pictures, let us know in the chat. We have a squirrel. It looks like it's eating a wrapper, a napkin, paper, something like that maybe. A bird with one of those 6-pack of rings that are usually come with our drink cans. It's wrapped around its neck. We have deer that looks like it's trying to cross the road and an opossum in a trash bin. I see a lot of negative emotions tied to this. We have disappointed, sad, frustrated, scared, worried, and these all make sense. We don't like seeing our wildlife in danger. And these are some of the issues that Leave No Trace is aiming to solve. And using these Leave No Trace principles, we can help prevent situations that make us feel this way. So the Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics is a national nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting the environment and teaching people to enjoy it responsibly. Their vision is to sustain healthy, vibrant, natural lands for everyone to enjoy, both now and in the future. The Leave No Trace program is built upon the premise that conservation of our outdoor resources is possible only when people know how to respect them and prevent them from their activities. And some more of the problems that the Leave No Trace Center aims to solve are trashed natural areas, polluted water, misinformation in the outdoors, wildlife at risk, damaged trails, and crowded parks, just to name a few. So the Leave No Trace Center was incorporated as a nonprofit in '94, but the concept of Leave No Trace is over half a century old. Care, responsibility, and stewardship for the outdoors isn't a new idea. Many Native and Indigenous cultures have taught and embodied these stewardship values for eons. In 1987, a no trace program was formed for wilderness and backcountry travel. The U.S. Forest Service, National Park Service, and Bureau of Land Management distributed a pamphlet called No Trace. And in the early 90s, there was a clear need for visitor education. So the Forest Service enlisted the National Outdoor Leadership School, NOLS, to develop hands-on science-based education training. Then in '93, an outdoor recreation summit convened in Washington, D.C. to form an independent Leave No Trace organization, and thus Leave No Trace Incorporated was born. And into 2007, the center developed a formal affiliate partnership to expand the possible use of Leave No Trace onto state park lands. So why is Leave No Trace important? It's important because we want to have a safe environment for both animals and people. We want to enjoy sustainable recreation and reduce our impact on nature so that future generations will be able to enjoy it as well. We want to keep wilderness wild. And most of the time, we don't intend on harming our natural surroundings, but we may not be knowledgeable on how our actions have a lasting impact on nature. So with that in mind, the Leave No Trace Center for Outdoor Ethics has successfully been able to restore over 100 areas nationwide with these Leave No Trace solutions. Over 60,000 people are formally trained in Leave No Trace annually. 235,000 kids have learned Leave No Trace in the last year. And today, the Leave No Trace program reaches over 15 million Americans and dozens of countries each year with conservation initiatives, education, training, research, and outreach. So I'm going to list the 7 principles for you guys here, and Claire's going to go over them in depth a little more in a few slides, but there are hand motions that go along with them, and they're fun to do, and I'd encourage you to do them along with me, and they help you remember. But all your cameras are off, you're all muted, so no one else will see you. So number 1, plan ahead and prepare. We always want to plan ahead for our trips and prepare for what's to come. Number 2, travel and camp on durable surfaces. This is somebody traveling and your tent camping on a durable surface. Number 3, dispose of waste properly. This is your shovel, your trowel, a little trash picker-upper. We always want to dispose of waste properly and trash our trash. Number 4, leave what you find. 2 fingers on each hand, 4 fingers total. Take a picture. It'll last longer. Number 5, minimize campfire impacts. This is your little fire. You can be a fire vendor. We always want to minimize our campfire impacts. And number 6, respect wildlife. 3 fingers on each hand. These are your antlers. We want to respect our wildlife. And number 7, be considerate of others. Say hi, hello on the trail, send peace, hang loose, rock on, whatever you want to do. We always want to be considerate of others around us. So if you participated with the hand motions, thank you. I appreciate it. And I hope that you'll remember them more. So these are some of the negative impacts that happen when Leave No Trace is ignored. On the top left, we have microplastics, and this happens when plastics and other litter and pollution end up in our waterways. They get blown by the wind, they end up in our water, and they break down over time into these tiny, tiny pieces called microplastics, and fish consume them thinking that they are food. And the problem with that is they'll have this material in their bellies and they'll think that they're full, but they're not getting any nutrients. So they start to go hungry and they can starve. And another thing with that is that it makes its way up to the food chain and ultimately to us if we consume this fish or another bigger fish that may have eaten it. And on the top right is an example of an invasive plant species. These are quagga mussels, and you may be aware of them if you're an avid boater around here or throughout the United States for that matter. Invasive plant species are a really big issue. Quagga mussels, these guys in the picture, they attach to hard and soft surfaces, including rocks, boats, recreational items like kayaks, and even flip-flops, which results in a significant urban and ecosystem disruption. And as they populate, quagga mussels colonize in such large numbers that they can clog intake pipes and screens and attach to boat motors and can even cause overheating and affect steerage. And these mussels also outcompete native species and use filter feeding to strip the water of healthy algae and plankton, which ultimately alters the food web and the ecosystem. And on the bottom left, we have a raccoon digging through trash. Animals can get a hold of human food and again, they become more desensitized to people and this can cause conflicts. And we always want to respect nature, but in the case that the leave no trace principles are ignored, future future recreators will have fewer opportunities and a lesser experience. So we always want to pack out what we pack in, including our mask, our wrapper of our granola bar, the peels, pet waste. These pollution examples are the result of people maybe not caring or not understanding the impact of their actions. But with that being said, these are some examples of the positives when Leave No Trace is practiced. We have clean, safe water, clean natural areas. We are able to protect wildlife in their natural habitat, and we are also able to stay safe outdoors, us, our pets, and the wildlife that we encounter. So I'm going to give it back to Claire, and she's going to describe the 7 principles with you guys more.
All right, thank you, Michelle. So we've learned about the 7 principles. We had some awesome hand motions to help us remember those. And you may be thinking that this is something that could only be applied when you're out on the trail or camping or hiking. But like I said, these can very easily be reframed for our neighborhood settings. So when we think about planning ahead and preparing, one way that we could do this in a neighborhood setting is in regards to our takeout food. So consider bringing your own reusable takeout containers if you're going to go out to eat, because styrofoam is one of those materials that just does not break down over time. So it's going to continue to be in our environment. And as Michelle said, it may lead to other animals ingesting it and not getting the actual nutrients that they need. A lot of recycling centers also just do not accept styrofoam. So go ahead and consider using those reusable options. Another way that we can plan ahead and prepare in our neighborhood is by thinking about our yards. So when planning the landscaping in your yard or features for your yard, just be mindful of what kind of wildlife that might attract and what you can do about that wildlife that might come your way. So we can see here, these people have backyard chickens, and although the chickens get to roam during the day, they do have a safe coop at night that also includes a fully enclosed space. So these people have planned ahead for any predators that they might bring in, and they're prepared for that. Our next principle is camping and traveling on durable surfaces. And we are going to reframe this one and think about just staying on paths and sidewalks. So when we're out in the park or our own neighborhood, we just want to try and stay on those paths. There are lots of animals here, at least in the Las Vegas area, such as burrowing owls, desert tortoises, or kangaroo mice that use the ground to make their homes. So when we don't stay on those pathways, we could accidentally collapse those burrows. Disposing of waste properly is the third principle. And this one is very easy to see how we could apply it in our neighborhood settings. But one way that we might not really have thought about is food waste. So maybe we've eaten an apple and we have an apple core that we're considering just chucking on the ground, or a banana peel that we just want to throw to the side. And perhaps we're thinking that an animal might come along and eat that, or that it will just decompose on its own. But it can actually take a banana peel a surprisingly long amount of time to break down and decompose completely. So in addition to just being gross, it's kind of nasty to see rotting food laying around. We want to make sure that we're disposing of food properly, because that wildlife might get a hold of it, and it could lead to something that they shouldn't have. So if you have food and you can't find a trash can, try and decompose or put it in the compost, or just wait until you can find a trash can. And speaking of trash bins, just be sure that if you're out and about and you should see an overflowing trash can and you have trash yourself, just pack that out. And that means holding on to it until you can find an appropriate trash bin. Around your own trash bins, be sure to keep those clean and free of any debris laying around. We want to make sure that our trash cans are secured and closed tightly so that the wind doesn't pick up that lid and blow trash all over. And that will also help prevent wildlife from getting into your trash can and making a meal of your trash. And cigarette butts, this is a big pet peeve of mine. I see it all over my neighborhood. So if you do smoke, just really try and get rid of those in an appropriate disposal site. Or you could consider getting a like a personal ashtray that you could carry with you, and then that way you can dispose of those once you get to a trash can. And finally, and I saw this in the comments, dog waste. Be sure to pick up after your dog, and this also includes throwing away that bagged poo. So it's kind of gross when we're out and about in our parks or in our neighborhoods and we see these piles everywhere, but it can be extra annoying when it's a bagged pile of poop that should have just made its way into the trash can. And in Las Vegas, at least, I've noticed a lot of our neighborhoods are starting to put in specific bins just for dog waste, and the city or the neighborhoods will come around and empty those. Our next principle is leaving what you find. Now, when we're out and about, it may be tempting to pick a pretty flower or pick up a cool rock. I'm kind of guilty of that sometimes, but we want to try and avoid collecting these natural items. So as was suggested by the hand motions, maybe take a picture of that item instead, or do a sketch of it. We want to leave these for other people to enjoy, but we also want to give wildlife a chance to utilize those things. Perhaps that animal was going to eat that flower or those seeds, or maybe that stick or rock would have been part of an animal's habitat that it needed. We also want to avoid carving into trees. So this can really take away from the beauty of the tree and kind of ruins the experience for other people. But the bark of a tree acts as a protective layer, much like our own skin does. So when that bark is carved into, it can leave the tree vulnerable to pest and disease. So our next principle is one that we're going to have to tweak just a little bit, minimizing campfire impacts. And we're going to think about this one in terms of fire pits that you may have in your backyard. With these, we just want to make sure that we're disposing of ashes properly. This means allowing time for those ashes to cool after the fire has been put out, and then placing them in a metal container at least 10 feet from a building or your house. After a few days, when they are 100% cooled off, you can go ahead and throw those in your trash can. But just be sure to check with your trash company and make sure that's allowed, because sometimes different companies may not allow ashes. You can also consider getting a pit cover, and this will help prevent embers from blowing out of the fire and landing on your property or your neighbor's property, or settling onto a really dry tree or bush and potentially burning down wildlife's homes. The next principle is respecting wildlife. And we can do this by avoiding both direct and indirect feeding. So some of you may have attended Lauren's program earlier today about not feeding wildlife. And you'll know that the difference between these two is direct feeding would be if I were to just walk up and hand this raccoon a biscuit, or if I am at a park and tossing out breadcrumbs for a duck. So that's kind of like an easier thing to see how you might have an impact, but indirect feeding, we may not be aware of. So that indirect feeding is what we see in this picture here. Perhaps you've left your dog's bowl out, or you've left your trash bins open, and wildlife will come along and kind of make a buffet of it. So we want to try and do that so we don't have an impact on that wildlife. We can also respect wildlife by observing from a distance. Sometimes we see some really cool animals come through town or come through our neighborhood, and it can be tempting to approach them so we can get a better view or just to see how close we can get. But I would encourage you not to do that, because when animals get scared, they can use energy that they should have been using to collect food for the winter or to find a mate. And instead, they're using that energy to run away from us. So we want to respect them and give them the space that they need. And we can do this by just grabbing a pair of binoculars and safely observing from a distance. And our final principle is being considerate of others. And we can do this when we're out on the trails. We always think about making room for others. And this is what we can easily do on our own sidewalks in the neighborhood. So be sure not to block sidewalks or paths, either with your body as you're walking or with your car that's in the driveway. So be sure to just pull up all the way in your driveway or consider street parking if you know your vehicle is too long. And this is really important for people with disabilities or different mobility needs who need that sidewalk access to get through. You can also be considerate of others by keeping your pets under control. So we have on the left here a very barky dog, and not only is it annoying for your neighbors, but it also ruins the soundscape. And the soundscape is kind of this space where all noise exists. And for some wildlife, that's a really important part of their lives. If you think about birds during the breeding season, they're making vocalizations to try and attract a mate, but they're also out there establishing territories. So a barking dog will make you an enemy of your neighbors, but it can also be harming wildlife. And again, if you're in a program today or earlier this week, you've already learned about how disruptive cats can be to an environment. But in addition to harming wildlife, they can also be an annoyance to your neighbors if your cat is using the neighborhood as a litter box instead of the litter box inside your house. So keeping your pets under control will make you a better neighbor, and it will keep wildlife safe, but it also keep your own pet safe.
So we don't need to be perfect to practice leave no trace. We'd encourage you to think of it as a spectrum rather than a black and white, yes, I'm practicing leave no trace exactly, or not. It just depends on where you see yourself on the spectrum at the time. On one side, on the right, we have significant impacts. Maybe we don't realize the effect of picking wildflowers or leaving behind dog waste. And on the other side, on the left, we have few impacts, very significant impacts, and we pack out our trash and maybe we'll pack out other people's too if we see litter on the street. So everyone exists somewhere on the spectrum, and the important part isn't that we are always on the far left, significantly less impact side at all times, but that we are working to be as close to that side as we can at the time. So a poll should pop up on your screen in a few seconds, and I want to ask you guys, where do you think you now fall on the leave no trace spectrum? After hearing all of the 7 principles, seeing all the hand motions, learning all about them and how we can incorporate them into our lifestyles, where do you see yourself moving forward? And I also want to remind you guys that Leave No Trace isn't a set of laws, but rather recommendations to guide us. Cool. So you guys should be able to see the results. And most of us have some impact, which is great. That's awesome. I'm glad you guys are learning and are able to incorporate that into your lifestyles. And also just be aware of where we are on the spectrum. So we don't necessarily have to be out and about in the wilderness to practice Leave No Trace, as Claire explained. So here's more opportunities to leave no trace. The first is choosing to refuse. You can make swaps like water bottles and reusable grocery bags. Those significantly add up over time, and then you just have less waste ending up in the landfill. And I would encourage you to challenge yourself and try to incorporate one zero waste at home alternative. And this doesn't mean you need to go out and buy a fancy new zero waste product, but maybe reusing an old water bottle or carrying utensils with you if you're going to eat out, and just, or maybe even saving the plastic container that your food came in and using that as a Tupperware. And the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, and recycle. First, we want to reduce, and that goes with choosing to refuse. We'd like to not have to deal with this waste if we are able to. So, reduce our consumption. And secondly, reuse. If you can get creative with something, try to repurpose it and make its lifespan last longer before it ends up in the landfill. And with that, recycle. And it's important to know how to recycle correctly. I know oftentimes we kind of just think, oh, it's plastic, it's metal, it's paper, we'll just throw it in the bin. And it's good to know that recycling is fairly easy, but we also need to be aware that recycle should be empty, clean, and dry, especially plastics that have had food in it. We want to rinse it out and make sure it's dry before we put it in our recycling bins because we don't want it to contaminate the other recyclables in there and make it potentially unable to be recycled and end up in the landfill. And some common things that I find in recycling bins that aren't actually able to be recycled are things like plastic bags, receipts, and paper towels. Plastic bags are too thin and they're often unable to be recycled through our traditional recycling sorter and recycling system. So I'd encourage you to repurpose them, use them as trash bin liners, or if you want, a lot of grocery stores usually have a bin towards the front of their store and they will properly dispose of those plastic bags for you. And receipts are, if you notice, they're kind of waxy, a little like smooth. Those are printed on thermal paper, so they're not able to be traditionally recycled like normal paper. So those should end up in your landfill. And paper towels, we use them for everything. They can get sticky, they can get wet and gross, and we don't want that to contaminate the other recyclables in our bin. So paper towels should also end up in your landfill. And we also want to volunteer whenever we can, whenever we're able to, and participate in community cleanups or just on your own if you're out at the park or just going for a walk around your neighborhood and you're safely able to. I'd encourage you to pick up some trash and properly dispose of it. It's nice to give back to the places we love and invest our time into the outdoor spaces that we care about. And Get Outdoors Nevada and the Parks and Rec Service regularly host cleanup events. And I think they've just released some more events for the upcoming months of March and April. So, overall, we want to respect the outdoors, especially with such a heavy online presence now. It's important to consider how our posts are impacting these outdoor spaces. So, think before you geotag, consider before tagging a location, whether it'd be best to tag a more broad, wider location rather than a small specific trail because the small trail may not be able to handle such heavy traffic coming through. And just be mindful of what your images portray. Give some thought to what you're doing in the pictures because it may encourage others to do the same. And with that, practice good leave no trace stewardship, and that encourages others to do the same as well. So it is impossible to leave absolutely no trace of your visit to the outdoors. Leave no trace isn't intended to be taken literally. It's not a set of rules. It's a philosophy that guides us while we enjoy our outdoor pursuit. There are recommendations. And the primary goal of Leave No Trace is to prevent the avoidable impacts like littering and minimize the unavoidable impacts like footprints. And by doing so, we can protect and preserve both natural resources and the quality of our recreational experiences.
All right, so hopefully you guys learned something tonight. Maybe you've already been familiar with these principles, but maybe you've got some ideas on how you can use them in your own neighborhoods. So we just want to encourage you to embrace the outdoors and get out there and at least try to utilize at least one of these principles in some small way. So if anybody has any questions at this point, we're happy to take those. And again, you can put those questions in the Q&A box. And if you have any ideas on ways that you have left no trace or ways that you've used these principles in your own neighborhoods, feel free to put those in the chat box. For those of you who don't have any questions and you're ready to hop off now, we do ask that you just take the survey at the end. It's a really easy way for us to get feedback. And if there's any topics or anything that you guys would like to hear about, you can let us know there. So thank you to everybody who came. And again, if you have any questions, please type those in the Q&A.
I see that Louise asked if this will be posted. Yes, it'll be up on our YouTube page in a couple of days.
And I see that Lynn had asked a question. Is the calendar for March out for Zoom shows? And yes, for the Nevada Department of Wildlife webinars, we do have those up on our Facebook page. If you go to the events tab, you should see all of our March options. I see a comment about dog poop in the parks. That is really frustrating, and sounds like, oh, you guys don't have any trash cans out there. As somebody who goes on very long hikes with my dogs, it is very tempting to just leave it, especially when you know you still have 6 more miles with a big old bag. But that would be a great opportunity to get one of those harnesses for your dogs that comes with like a little storage pouch. And that way you can make your dog carry their own poop. But I'm sorry that you have to deal with that. That is really frustrating to see it everywhere. All right, so that looks like it's just about it for questions. If you guys think of anything after this program that you'd like to ask, our contact information is here for you. And again, thank you for joining, and we'll go ahead and wrap this up.